we're bringing on our final guest, and she's a historical fiction writer, and she actually um, was part of a group of historical fiction writers that did an online program, and we've had all the authors on except the final one will be on April 1st. So, welcome Lauren Francis-Sharma to Black Authors Matter TV.
Hi, how are you?
Doing great. How
Wonderful.
are you doing?
Good, thank you. Thanks for having me.
I like
Thank
your
you for being
glasses.
here.
Thanks.
Now, I was telling the audience that there was the four of you all that had an online event, and you were all historical fiction authors of books that are recently released. So we had Shara Moon on,
Yes.
and we're having you on. We have Victoria Christopher Murray on April 1st. And there was
Wonderful, my
one other
friend.
author. Who was the fourth author that was part of the group of you all? The group of four of you.
Hmm. Oh, actually,
I
let
don't
me.
have it in front of me, but she's already been on the show.
Oh, okay. Not Nancy Johnson.
Yes, Nancy
Oh,
Johnson.
okay, Nancy.
Yeah.
I knew she had a book out that came out. It's a great book, so I'm really excited about that book. Yes.
Yeah, she came on a couple of weeks ago. So
Right. I must say that was pretty recent.
yes.
Oh,
So your book
good.
is called Casualties of Truth. Do you have a copy of the book so you can show it on the screen?
Yeah, I do actually. Let's see. Right there.
Okay, Casualties of
Yes.
Truth. And your storyline is a little bit different from usual because you take your story off American shores to tell a historical story.
Yes,
So,
partially so.
yeah. So tell us what Casualties of Truth is about.
Yeah, so it's about a young woman who goes to South Africa in 1996 and sits through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's amnesty hearings. So the amnesty hearings that happen after Mandela wins are set up really to allow people on both sides of the resistance fight to tell the truth about what they did and apply for amnesty. So she's there during this time. And some things happen to her in South Africa. She meets a man and she hopes she never sees him again. And then he shows up 2 decades later at a dinner with her and her husband at a restaurant in
Mhm.
DC when her life is completely different. And she does not want her husband to know what happened in South Africa to her. And she thinks maybe it's a coincidence, but she learns pretty quickly, like in the middle of dinner, that it's actually not a coincidence that he's there.
Oh wow, that sounds intriguing.
Mhm. It does.
I
Yes.
like
So
So
that.
is romance in here, or is it
no, it's
more
not. No
dramatic?
romance. No,
Okay.
Okay, I like it even more now.
it is a suspense literary novel. So I kind of I was a little afraid to call it suspense, but I think that the minute you open the book, you realize that you're probably going to get something very unexpected. So I think suspense is the right term, even though I know there are lots of mystery writers out there who have a particular idea about what a mystery book is, and this is not a mystery book, but it is suspenseful in many ways. Yeah.
Okay. Now, this is not your first book.
No, it's my third.
Okay.
And even though I've been probably thinking about this book the longest, because I was in South Africa in 1996, and I was not thinking about
Oh,
being a writer. I was an attorney, or I was law student actually at the time. And I remember thinking to myself, this would make a really interesting story. And I've been sort of playing with that, but I don't think I had the right sort of perspective. I don't think I had the right skill level. I wasn't ready to write this book until now. And it came up during COVID when, many of us were sitting at home thinking about whether or not we were ever actually going to get out again.
Right.
and a lot of books were birthed out of COVID. A whole
Yes, well,
lot.
we had some extra time, but
Hmm.
for me, I was thinking about I was thinking about like all those places that I'd been and all the places I wanted to go back to. And South Africa was a really complex place for me. I mean, obviously, given the time that I was there, which was only 2 years after the elections, the first democratic elections, it was still, still a really complex, place in terms of race. And a lot of things happened to me that I wasn't expecting to happen, because it was Africa and I was expecting Africa to be a particular thing and that thing didn't turn out quite the way that I thought. So I'm sitting during COVID and I'm like, why you keep thinking about this place so much? And when I was at the hearings, I wrote down everything that I heard during the hearings. A part of me just thought, I may never hear anything like this again. I may never see
Right.
what I'm experiencing here again. And so I wrote down every single thing. And I kept those notebooks with me for, I don't know, 25 years almost. And I had it in the basement. And I went down in my basement and I pulled them up and I was like, I think it's time. I think it's time to tell this story.
Wow. So what you have in your book is information that's really not going to be found anywhere else because it's
Right.
firsthand from your point of view,
That's right.
especially as an American going to South Africa.
That's right.
So you really have a unique perspective. And then you can look back on it years later when you reread the information years later. Did did you remember it the way you wrote it? Were you able to
Yeah.
bring all the vision back, the images back to mind?
That's a
I
great question.
was. It is a good question, and I was. And you know why? Because it was so impactful. Like I remember being in there at the time, I think I was probably 20 something years old, and I remember thinking to myself, "Oh, right, I'm actually going to leave here completely changed by this experience." One of the stories that I heard when I was there, I mean, before leaving the United States, I thought to myself that South Africa and apartheid was very similar to sort of our civil rights movement. And it was, right? I mean, there was, oppression and protests and jail and all that. But what I didn't understand was the machinery of the government, of the South African apartheid government, and how not only were they intent on sort of putting down the resistance, but they were willing to do anything and everything, including murdering women and children and not just your leaders, but anyone who spoke out, even if you were handing out a pamphlet or at a school like talking about the resistance, they were watching, they were coming after you. And so I learned a lot about sort of, what governments were willing and would be willing to do to suppress. And I remember thinking to myself, oh, right, if this can happen here, it can happen anywhere, right? And so one of the stories that I heard was about a group of young boys who had they wanted to fight in the resistance, right? They wanted to work for the ANC, and so they met this black double agent. They did not know he was working for the government, and he came along and he was like, "Hey, I'll take you to Mozambique." And I will, have you be in an ANC cell and you'll learn how to shoot and you learn how to resist. And they were like, great. They didn't tell their parents. And they got on this bus one morning and they were taken to a safe house where they were poisoned and tortured and blown up on the bus, and the bus was thrown over a cliff.
Oh my
And I'm
goodness.
sitting there, yes, and it was all cleaned up, right? Like nobody knew. And I'm sitting there as a young 20-something-year-old woman, and I'm watching their parents, their mothers, learn for the first time what had happened to their children. And we were all just, I mean, it wasn't a dry eye in the place, right? We're doubled
Yeah,
over. It
yeah.
was just so much pain. So when you asked me if I remembered it, I remembered exactly everything that I felt, everything that I saw watching that. Could I remember all the other details outside of my feelings? Probably not perfectly, but I remember those moments, and I've been thinking and carrying those stories with me for all these years, and just so happened that I felt brave enough finally to put it down on paper.
Wow. Now, when you finally were ready to put it all on paper, though, how did you know where to start? Because you have all of these thoughts swirling around your head, all of these things that you want to include. How do you organize yourself, and then how do you even get started?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've actually been thinking about that a lot. I mean, because you're right. I had notepads with that looked like transcripts, right? So I wrote somebody's name, then I put a colon and I wrote what they said. And I would have maybe some reactions that I had like, "Oh my God," or "I can't believe this," or something. But other than that, that was it. So I
Mhm.
knew that I wanted to have a character much like me, an American who kind of goes an outsider, sort of, a little naive and just expecting that she's going on an internship. She's going to learn a little bit about the new Constitution. So I had a character, I had, this history, and then what to do with it, what to do with it. But one of the things that I left South Africa thinking was it enough? Right? Like when I came back and I was thinking about the amnesty hearings, I was thinking about those women, particularly women, who would get up, and many of the victims were able to testify, and they would say, "You took my child, you killed my child, but you never came
Hmm.
to me. You never said sorry to me until you were applying for amnesty. And now you want me to forgive you? I don't forgive you. You killed my husband. I don't forgive you. Left me with these children and I had to raise them by myself." And they would just be very pointed in saying, "I'm part of this process. I understand that as a South African that I have to sort of, look toward collective healing and collective justice. But me as an individual, I'm not sure I can do this." And when that kept coming up in my head, and I'm thinking to myself, well, what if? What if there's somebody who really doesn't feel like the process was enough for them? And that's where
Hmm.
my story took off.
Wow.
Okay. As far as I know, and I could be wrong, but I remember asking somebody who was involved in those hearings, the reconciliation hearings, and I asked them, were the people who were harmed compensated monetarily? And they told me no. And I'm like, well, what's the point in having the hearings then?
Hmm.
And
Yeah,
it's like window dressing. I mean,
yeah,
it's like you hit me with the 18 wheeler, I survived, but I get nothing.
yeah.
It's so
It's complicated. It's
yeah.
really
I guess
complicated.
it would have to be. Um,
Yeah. I
why
think
did
many
they
people.
choose? Did they say, since you were there during that time, did they say why there was no monetary damages paid, or was it just understood that there wasn't going to be, and it wasn't really? Uh,
Yeah, I mean, I think that
not
there were promises that people were going to get lots of things, right? They were going to get that there could be some compensation in some cases, that the people who did what they did would be, if they didn't tell the truth, they would be prosecuted later. Many of those things just didn't happen. And it's a failing of the system. And there are many books that have been written about sort of what went wrong with the amnesty hearings. And, you can talk about sort of the economic, how the reconciliation process itself didn't give Black South Africans the economic power in the country, and so you could talk about that. You could talk about how a system that's set up to prosecute people, they need evidence in a particular way. And if you tell people that they tell the truth, you can't use that evidence, but you have to find other evidence to prosecute them. And it was such a well um, run sort of killing machine that it was hard to
Hmm.
prosecute people afterward. But most importantly, I think the idea was that we weren't going to be able to know everything that happened because everything was so suppressed in the country, right? Like, think about how little we knew as Americans about what was happening on the ground because they were keeping outside media out and they were controlling their media
Mhm.
inside, right? And so Black people were telling the world's trying to scream like, you don't understand what's happening here. They're killing us, they're taking our children, they're kidnapping, they're murdering, they're torturing, blah 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 blah, and nobody could hear. And so part of the hearings was really about bringing the truth to light finally. Oh, I'm not crazy. I know you took my child. I know you told me that she ran off with a boy and didn't want to be contacted, but in fact, you killed her. And this was the kind of
Mm.
thing that kept coming up over and
Mm.
over again. So in some respects, the hearings were necessary because people wanted to know the stories. They wanted to be heard, they wanted to be seen, and they wanted to be told the truth. And so it was very healing for a lot of people to finally understand what had happened, as a whole, not just my individual thing, but what happened to the neighbor down the street. And I think that there was something really important about it. And more than that, though, for me, and by the way, I don't come on either side of this, but more than that, for me, I really think that Desmond Tutu and Nelson Mandela, with these stories, I think they were warning the world. Look at this. Look at what these people did. Look at what we can learn from what these people have done. And if there's anything that we can take from that right now in this country that we're living in, there's a lot a lot of things, that are very similar in the way that our current administration is operating in the same way that the National Party began to operate in 1948 when they won that election.
Wow.
Mm. Now, you went there as a lawyer, or you were in law school.
Hmm.
So, what led you to be in law school in Johannesburg?
So I was a law student at the University of Michigan here, and we had a professor who was like, I think there's some really interesting things going on in South Africa. Anybody want to go? And I was like, I think I do.
Okay.
So it was like a semester abroad program. And so
Oh.
it was a great opportunity to be in a country where they were writing a new constitution, a constitution that like took our pretty decent constitution and made it so much better. I mean, South Africa has probably the best constitution in the world right now. It's the best living document for justice and equality. Whether it works the way that it's supposed to work is a question for us and a question for them. But on paper, it's a pretty darn good constitution. So, yeah.
It's interesting that we're talking about South Africa because that country has recently been in the news as well.
Hmm. Hmm. A lot. Yes. And it's no
Mm.
surprise, right? When you think about, Elon Musk, and you
Yeah.
think about, Peter Thiel and many of the people whose wealth, original like family wealth, were sort of built in South Africa. And, for Musk, I mean, his family actually moved to South Africa because they were party sympathizers. In 1948, when the National Party won that election, they were a far right party, and nobody knew that they were going to win. Like they had, black people couldn't vote. They had white people voting. It was already a very conservative government. And then this fringe right party that had a platform of separate and a platform of, white nationalism. They woke up in the morning and they had actually won this election. And
Mhm.
people were surprised, and people were like, okay, it's not going to last forever. But it lasted 50 years, and 50 years of terror. To be fair, everything didn't start with the National Party in 1948 and the apartheid government, as we call it. Apartheid was, many parts of the apartheid system had already existed, but the National Party just turned the dial up, made it worse. And when you think about sort of what they said in their speech in 1948, they talked about sort of, we have two choices. We can either go down the road of equality, which means that, everybody will be able to vote, but that would mean white suicide. I mean, they literally said this. It would mean white suicide. And, in order to maintain the purity of the white race, we have to go the other route, which is separate
Mm.
apartheid. And so we're choosing that. And so in that respect, and this is what they said we have to mold the youth. We have to convince, our we have to convince people that, you know, Christianity is the way to proceed. We have to use the churches for that, and we have to keep everybody out. Anybody who wants to have influence in our country cannot tell us how we're supposed to operate, and they will be, I think, I can't remember the language, but something like put down or dealt with or something like that, they said. And when you think about what's happening here, you think about sort of, you know, the Department of Education molding the youth. You think about sort of, you know, devaluing the humanity of other people, you know, all the USA ID dismantling, making sure that people are suppressed and
Mm.
sickly and, you know, and don't have opportunities. So you think about labor union busting, you think about EEOC, DEI, all of that dismantling that's going on. It's a playbook. It's the same playbook over and over again. And you know, and it's no surprise that there's a South African, you know, sort of calling the place for this.
Hmm. Yeah, this is
So,
a really sad and scary time we're living in right now.
It is. It is.
I have another question about when they created the system in 1948. Do you know if they were looking at the United States in terms of, okay, I,
You
I
see my
struck a
face?
nerve. Yeah, I did. I did.
Yes,
I struck a
ma'am.
nerve there. Okay.
Yes.
In terms of the structure of the social settings here, although America wasn't uniform in terms of Black rights,
That's right.
America's a
Yeah.
big country, so you know, some places were much more liberal than others and so forth. But um, tell us about that as far as you know, if they use it as a model for what they were about to do.
Absolutely. I mean, Jim Crow was huge for them. They looked at, you know, the whole idea of how you actually manage separating the races, right? Like, because it was I mean, think about sort of the demographic makeup of South Africa and the United States, right? You have very similar sort of groups of people. You have blacks, you have whites, you have Asians, right? And so what do we do with those people in between? What do we do with, you know, they call them coloreds in South Africa, but, you know,
Mm-hmm.
essentially they're mulattoes, mixed race people
Right.
here. How do we manage them? You know, they give them a few more rights than, you know, than pure blacks, right? You give them a little bit more. So that whole system, the way that, you know, we had a very sophisticated you know, our South had a very sophisticated system of sort of separating people, keeping them at bay, having them compete with each other for like the smallest minuscule thing. You know, I don't have to tell you all this.
Mm-hmm.
And they were also looking to the Nazis, right? I mean, you know, the Nazis, so you've got Jim Crow on one side, you've got the Nazi movement happening on the other side. And so they had a lot of really interesting sort of, you know, models to use for suppression and oppression. I mean, when you think about the violence the Nazis had used, that, you know, much of that came from Germany. And so, and now, if you watch what's happening here, we're now looking at the Nazis, and we're now looking at, not we, but some of them are now looking at the Nazis, and some of them are now looking at the South African Afrikaner regime. And so, like I said before, it's just this constant cycle. And, you know, in my opinion, if you really study it, you can see sort of what's coming next because the playbook doesn't change.
Hmm.
Mm.
Well, I do want to give a nod back to your book,
Oh, right,
just
that.
so
Yeah, the book.
so people can know how. So your book does not go back to the 40s. It starts with the Truth and Reconciliation
Yeah,
hearings
so
and all
it's
that.
1940, in 1996 and 2018. What I do is I do have my protagonist, Prudence, who is there in South Africa, understanding. She has to understand what is happening in in these hearings. And so you do get a little bit of this history about sort of the National Party and how Black people in South Africa think about it versus sort of how she thinks about it from her sort of American Jim Crow perspective. So I play around a little bit with that, but generally you got two timelines: 2018 Washington D.C., 1996 Johannesburg.
Oh, okay. Okay. And so, um, I don't want to say how does it end, but because then that you don't want to do a spoiler.
That's a heck of a question, Gwen.
You have to read it to find out.
You have to read
Um,
it to find
but
out,
you
yeah.
said it's more like a suspense. So see, the female is the protagonist in the book.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so she's the key main character, and
Yes.
but the person that she's from her past,
Yes, he's South African.
he's South
He's
African.
he's South
Okay,
African, and so he shows up
okay,
at dinner,
okay.
and then you get to see sort of what went down in 1996 between them that makes him want to come and ask her for a very, very big favor that she
A
cannot,
favor. Oh,
uh-huh,
Oh,
yeah, that she can't necessarily say no to because he's got some leverage.
mm.
okay. It sounds like a very
It,
interesting
this
story.
sounds intriguing for
It
real.
really does,
Yeah.
and different,
I hope
and
so. I
different.
hope
And then
so.
the final couple of minutes that we have, your other books that were before this one, were they in a similar vein? Were they did they have a historical bent or contemporary or
Yeah, no, they're both historical. I mean, I promised myself I wasn't gonna write any more historical books, and so this is this is the closest I come to like a contemporary novel, 1996 and 2018. But the first
Mhm.
book was Till the Well Runs Dry, and that was set in the late 1940s to 1960s about a woman who leaves Trinidad and migrates to America. That story is actually based on my grandmother's story.
Mhm.
A
Okay.
little historical fiction. And then I go way, way back to the 1700s with my second book, Book of the Little Axe, which is kind of a sweeping family saga about a family who's in Trinidad in the late 1700s when the English take over the island, steal the island, essentially. And the English had a very different colonial ruling style than the Spanish did. And so these free black people realize they're not going to be so free when the English come into that island. And so one of the children actually takes off and heads to the American West and lives with the Indian Crow Native American tribe. And so she's sort of there, and it's a really sort of a complex, geographically complex novel, but I think it actually works to show you sort of how what's happened in the Caribbean is just about to happen in the United States. Literally, the colonial domination, the killing off of indigenous people, then the continued enslavement of Black people. So you can see those two parallels. So very, very different.
Okay. Well, show us the cover again of Casualties of Truth.
Yes, thank you.
And it's available wherever books are sold. And so get your copy. And
Thank you.
Lauren, welcome to the show again. And thank you for being a guest.
Thank
And it's very
you.
intriguing conversation. What
I
took us
enjoy
across
talking.
the pond, so to speak.
Across and down. Yes, down the
Yeah.
pond.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you have a great evening and
Thank you, too.
congratulations on the success of your book.
Great.
Thank you
Thank you
so
so much.
much.
Lovely talking to you. Bye bye.
Have a great night.
Good night.
You too. Bye.